All right. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks to everybody that's online. Thanks to those who are here in Blacksburg. My name is Brian Hansen, and we've been talking about it for a while, so I think people should be fairly familiar with it. But we're going to have hopefully a little bit deeper conversation today about disrupting academic bullying, and it's an initiative, of course, headed by Dean DePauw, and something that I'm very passionate about as well in my role as ombudsperson for the graduate school. So I am really excited that people came to kind of see what we can do to disrupt academic bullying in your individual environments, because that's what's really important. And what's important about this conversation is that we can say this is something that we believe greatly about, but it's really about bringing it out to the programs and departments and student groups and those that are all part of the graduate school community, so that they can determine how this is best going to fit in their group dynamics. So what is bullying? So very simply, I think it's important to start out with the definition of what we're looking at. Essentially, what we're looking at as a definition is intentional behavior targeted at an individual or group that is repeated, hostile or offensive, and creates an intimidating or threatening environment, which produces a risk of psychological and or physical harm. But that behavior that creates an intimidating or threatening environment is what really we want to try to address when we're talking about how can we disrupt academic bullying. So there's various forms of bullying, and I've put them up here. They're also on our website. So if I guess I'll mention this a few times. If you haven't seen the website, you can go to the graduate school homepage and you'll see all sorts of stop signs that say disrupt academic bullying. You can click on there and you'll go to our website where a lot of the information that I'll be talking about today will be there as well. So I won't go into the details of these different forms of bullying, but it's important to understand that bullying can have many different faces. Some of it can be direct, some of it can be indirect, some of it is a little more focused on disrupting relational dynamics. There's lots of ways that people justify the bullying behaviors that are exhibited by, kind of back to the academic experience. Well, this is tough love, or this is trying to get you to really understand what the professional environment is like. So you need to be able to endure this type of behavior, because that's how people are going to treat you when you go to your first faculty job, or when you rise up as a leader. Another aspect of bullying, it can either be individually oriented, where it's one person that is the aggressor and the bully. It can also take the form of mobbing, and that can happen in groups where people try to align to power structures, and so people kind of just go along with this type of behavior, and people can feel ganged up on. Why do we address bullying? Of course, we want to promote civility in our environment. We want people to feel like this is an engaging, and conversations can be productive and constructive, which will hopefully increase the productivity of all people involved. That's students, faculty, staff, all working in a positive environment are likely to be more engaged and motivated to be productive. Essentially, if people are feeling better about the place where they are working, you can hopefully decrease absenteeism and decrease disengagement. If we do raise these issues, we are hoping that we can create people that are more aware of these dynamics, and that they can model constructive group dynamics, which will in turn hopefully influence higher morales. So those are a couple of the things that we put out there as why it's important to address bullying. But from the group here, what are some further reasons that you feel it's important to address academic bullying?
Well, I think it's important to impact the culture of a department. And it is all of these things that you mentioned, but the direct impact is graduates from our programs will now become faculty either at this university or other universities. And if they come up, we see a lot of modeling that happens in behaviors. And that's why I think we shake off some of the things that occur as normal, because it has become social norm or normalized for us to then view this as, well, it's academia, right? But it doesn't have to be. So I think it's really important to address the culture within our departments, because we're redefining this behavior if we don't.
Beautiful. Yeah. I mean, that's exactly right. I mean, we have we learn from the experiences that we're part of, and so disrupting that cycle of poor leadership, mentoring, even if it might have worked for some people, it might not work for others. And so that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
We're also redefining as well as disrupting, redefining. Way too often we hear people say, well, that's just normal. That's just how it is. That's what happened to me. So redefining normal, that should not be normal. It should not be okay to test how much someone wants their PhD in a hazing situation or something like that. Or how badly do you want your assistantship? You need to work extra time or something like that. So that should not be normal. And so making it very clear that that's not normal behavior, and then educating about what should be normal. What do we replace this with? Otherwise you're leaving something to the void. So how do we change the environment and build a community?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it just makes me think in my role, one of the most often phrases that I hear from individuals that come and talk to me is, well, I'm not sure if I should be here because isn't this just how grad school is? And, some parts, this is how grad school is, but a lot of times it's like, no, you should not feel under, threat or intimidated, or you're in a hostile environment. And, by raising this awareness, like you say, will hopefully help people feel more comfortable saying, I need to talk to somebody, so they can go to their program directors, or they can go to somebody that they feel will not just think that they're complaining. Let's talk a little bit about the roles of bullying. So those that are directly involved, you have the target. So that is the person or people that the mistreatment is directed. You have the aggressor, or what we would call the bully, someone who repeatedly and consistently says or does something harmful or malicious to another person or to a group of people. So those are the individuals that are directly involved, what you would call the bully and the target. But then we have also the community, or the observers. And this is these two roles as observers are what we really want people to be mindful of. So you have the passive bystander. So that's someone who is part of that group, who observes the behavior that's going on, or might be walking by and witness behavior, but feels uncomfortable about what's going on, but chooses not to say or do anything. And a lot of times it's understandable, because people are uncomfortable by not knowing what to do, or understanding, how can they be helpful in this situation, or maybe there's something that I don't understand about the situation where this behavior should take place. But what we want to try to impress, at least here at Virginia Tech, is this mindset of an active bystander and upstander. And we want to provide people with the skill set and the ability to at least understand how they can either speak out on behalf of someone or take actions that are supportive of someone else. And to be a good active bystander, you don't have to get aggressive and overtly, disrupt what's going on in the middle of the group. I mean, that being supportive and being a good active bystander can simply just be, reaching out to somebody and checking in with them. Saying, I just observed that, it sounded like you were experiencing some pretty harsh treatment, or you don't even have to get that judgmental on it. Just say, is everything okay? can I be supportive? That could be your first step to be a good active bystander. So another way to identify bullies, you have different types of bullies. So we talked about the different forms of bullying, but here are kind of more types of bullies. So you have chronic bullies, those who are, there might be the people that you think of as jerks in your community, but are aggressive, dominating, use coercive strategies in nearly every encounter in and out of work classroom. There's a good book out there by a professor out in Stanford. The title might be a little bit off-putting, but it's called the No Asshole Rule, and it came out of a Harvard Business Review article many years ago, and then turned into a book. But talks a lot about these chronic bullies and how to eliminate them from the environments that we're in. There's the opportunist bullies. So those are the people that might seem a little more savvy or political, where they're kind of exerting their power, wielding their power in ways for political gamemanship. The accidental bully, those are people that maybe, kind of like the cycle that you're talking about, Kathy. Maybe they just don't know this behavior isn't appropriate when I've got this power structure. Maybe I feel like this is how I'm supposed to treat people that are below me because it's doing them good. So people that you might need to, share, leadership skills or provide some kind of training. And then you also have substance abusing bullies, which, have other problems that are influencing the way that they are working in the academic context. Another way to distinguish bullies beyond this frame is whether they're a predatory bully. So that's somebody kind of like the chronic bully, but somebody that seeks out and tries to dominate people on a regular basis just so that they can exert their power and try to maintain the balance of power that they have that favors them. And then there's also the situational type of bully that might get triggered by a certain dispute, or they might, feel like they're threatened in some way, and that, causes them to go into aggressive bullying type modes or behaviors. So what are these behaviors? A whole bunch of different examples, and people might feel differently, and this is one of the tough things about bullying is, some of these behaviors people might interpret as either appropriate or not appropriate, but it's always important to be aware of these types of behaviors as a bystander, so you can at least check in to see how comfortable people feel about the things that are taking place. So you can take a look at the bullying behaviors that are listed here, but I kind of want to get a sense of how people feel out here online, and then out here in this crowd. If you were to kind of reflect upon times when you either experienced bullying yourself or observed bullying, what types of behaviors could you identify? Does anybody feel comfortable sharing?
One of the things that I actually observed in the class that I took was the effort by the professor to continually point out that he was the most powerful person in the room. And he would do it sometimes in subtle, but often in very unsubtle ways, so that it was very clear that the students, their success depended on him and how he felt about them. And I throughout the semester, I watched that happen. Where at any opportunity, in fact, one time one of the questions was, who's the most powerful person in here? Who makes the most money? Those kinds of questions that and you could feel the shift in the room because nobody knew how to respond. What do you say? And these are students on assistantships. They have to maintain a certain grade to maintain their assistantship. So they were very uncomfortable. Or perhaps if they were in a peer-to-peer, everybody on equal footing, they may have shut that down. So that's, that's something where you find someone. Bullying is also about power. It's about power. It's almost always about power. So someone very overtly pushing the power dynamics to make sure that I am the most power. I'm the person with the power in the room, and you're not.
And so, thinking about that situation, how did you respond?
Basically, I diverted because there wasn't.
Okay.
It's difficult to say no, you're not. But I just kind of diverted things in the context of what we were talking about and moved away from that. I was in a position where there wasn't anything you said maybe to do to me. So I didn't worry about that, but I could feel the uncertainty, the shift in the room. So I diverted us back into whatever it was we had been discussing and push things like that. And when you do that, you're disrupting what's expected. So there's always kind of everybody gets a little ruffled because they're in these kinds of things. It's an unconscious script. I'm going to say this and you're going to respond like this. And you disrupt that and disrupt those expected responses. He didn't know what to do. Everybody there was a little ruffly feeling, and then everybody was right back into, okay, let's talk about what we were talking about. So that was, at that point in time, that seemed to be the natural to do, was to disrupt the expectation or the pattern and move into something else.
Great, so changing those dynamics, disrupting those dynamics. Very cool, Kathy, thank you. Anybody else have a time where they feel like they observed bullying behaviors that they'd be comfortable sharing?
I was interested in adding on to what was just said, because it seems like that person who was just speaking was able to quickly divert, which is pretty admirable, but also takes a certain kind of knowledge and self-awareness and awareness of the situation, and also a certain kind of labor that not all of us are either trained to do or able to do on a personal level. And also, that example seemed a little more clear to me. Some of the examples that I've witnessed are less clear. They're more sort of murky, especially when you're in a situation where graduate students' work is being critiqued, either in a defense or in a meeting about their proposal or about their thesis or dissertation. And so that fine line between offering constructive criticism for the work to make it better academic work, while also recognizing attempts at, from this list, attempts at humiliation or intimidation or to destroy someone's self-esteem or confidence. That happens sometimes in those meetings when someone's work is being criticized. So sometimes it's really difficult to identify in the moment that it's happening. You might leave the meeting and walk out thinking that was inappropriate or it went overboard or it was not constructive criticism, but in the moment it's really difficult to identify. And I really love tips on strategies for that diversion that the woman before was talking about. How do you divert things away from those kinds of comments if you sort of have this gut feeling that it's not constructive or it's hurting the confidence of the graduate student?
That's great, and that is important to consider, because it does take a bit of psychological risk to say something, to try to divert, to try to bring the conversation to somewhere else. And when you're thinking and considering that psychological risk, you're kind of trying to weigh what are the power imbalances that I have here. How can I shift them? And all of that's hard to do in the moment, to feel like, boy, I am on top of this. I'm going to jump to it and I'm keyed in and this is going to be my immediate response. And that's totally understandable. I mean, it is difficult and we're not going to expect culture to change overnight. And in all situations, that might not be possible. So I think in terms of tips to know how to divert, we'll talk a little bit later on some different actions that can be taken, but just to address it right now, I would say, first you have to consider, what is it that I can do to bring this conversation to a different level, or how can I at least direct energy? So if it's an individual that's being critiqued in a way that seems maybe harassing or hostile or offensive beyond, good feedback, positive feedback, you might try to interject some kind of feedback that might be different than the tone that's being given, or you might ask a question that diverts the attention to somewhere else. Those might be interjections at the moment, but if you're not comfortable doing that, I think the next level of intervention would be to reach out to that person after the moment, so that you can at least talk to that person, find out how they felt about the situation, and if the situation happens again, maybe at that point you can think, well, what would be helpful for me to do in that situation to kind of redirect what's going on.
That's important though, because what you just walked us through was a way to avoid being combative with an individual, because that never works, right? Then they become defensive. Then now you're the jerk, and they're, they have this sense of, they've been vindicated for the role and stance that they're taking. So that's where I always take like an approach that is more my perspective. Like, I don't blame the individual, I don't attack their perspective, even though I can view it as extremely wrong. But it's extremely right for that individual. And if we're talking about these baby steps, which we have to take if we're doing change within our culture, it's not going to happen overnight. That's just a blow up, riot would occur, because then everyone just clashes. But how do we make these little perturbances where it's not enough for someone to feel like they're being attacked, it's just you're giving kind of, and it almost takes an individual with a lot of like self-humility to then, enter a conversation if someone's being attacked. Well, I didn't even actually realize that was a part, and as another expert, it is like a committee where you have a committee of experts.
Yeah.
And it's methodology, and it's like, oh, I didn't realize that about its methods. I'm a law person. But that's, okay, insightful. So how do we actually think about this moving forward? So you're not attacking, but it's bringing, again, that conversation one step forward and taking all of the focus off of one individual and kind of sharing that focus. So then that aggressor then loses, right? They lose because they aren't allowed to attack their target. Their target has now been spread toward a colleague. And that's another level of aggression if you're going to start attacking your colleague, because there's that, power hierarchy.
Yeah, I think, and that's important to understand because, number one, we just want to change the culture so people don't just feel like, oh boy, I just don't want to be in that situation in the future. I want to do something that is supportive of the individual or that can disrupt the dynamic right now. And by taking those opportunities and by at least trying to neutralize that power, you're hopefully going to end things in that moment, which, is the key, and can at least, if you feel like you do have the ability to take that psychological risk and redirect or kind of, try to bring the critique to a positive feedback cycle, then hopefully that person, and I guess I'm a humanist and idealist, I would hope that people follow that behavior and that pattern in the moment. I'm going to go to this next slide here, which talks about institutional factors that foster bullying within academia. And one thing that's not up here, but I think is a big part of academia, is ego and identity.
Oh, yes.
And I think that is, maybe that's within all different types of organizations and institutions, but definitely prevalent in the academic context. There's also inherent power differentials within academic institutions. We are teaching people and trying to develop people professionally, which means you have people all the way from the early novice level to the extreme experts. Proliferation of disrespectful communication style, and that comes from that cycle that was talked about earlier. People, to focus on the development of specialized knowledge. Oftentimes, leadership and mentoring training is not part of the development of their specialized knowledge. So you learn from what is modeled. And, so if disrespectful communication styles or harsh criticism, that's not positive feedback, or constructive styles of feedback, that's probably what's gonna, become part of the culture. And then, of course, like many places, there's a competition for finite resources. And in a institution of higher education, you have so many different. Centralization is often a goal that people have now, but there's still a lot of silos that compete for finite resources, which can cause not only conflict, but also people to be aggressive in bullying type ways. So what other institutional factors create an environment that is conducive for bullying?
Institutional racism.
Institutional racism, yeah. Sexism,
Basically, institutional discrimination.
discrimination, yeah. Any others?
I think in the sciences, there's a definite almost scorn for being emotionally intelligent and having the soft skills of being able to interact with people in positive ways. It's not really like leadership and mentorship. It's not actively fostered. And the people who show it sometimes are not very good competitors or not very good. It's not valued as a personality part for leaders in my part of science. So that sort of chooses leaders who show an aggressive, sort of dominating style of leadership over collaborative stuff.
Well, faculty are
That's good.
rewarded in both, there's a tenure track faculty member for promotion and tenure, and they're rewarded for the outcomes that if bullying type practices or activities are then put forth, they become more successful with competition for finite resources. And so it really creates the system where people feel they have to engage and participate in order to achieve what it is they want. They're not thinking about others.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, that reward for
The incentive
not
system
there.
is set up
Yeah,
in a way that really fosters the type of behaviors.
yeah. And that's kind of tied into identity, and which maybe justifies the dismissal or disregard of what people might call soft skills, like you say. Yeah.
We also see imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
We talk about imposter syndrome at the graduate school, at the graduate student level, but there's imposter syndrome all through the system. You have leaders who, feel like the leadership police is going to come knock them on the shoulder and say, yeah, you don't belong here. So you have that all through, and that, in that effort and in the insecurities underneath that, you can indeed develop bullying behaviors to kind of keep yourself there.
I like that. I think that's a really important point, because you want to look at it from that perspective as well, because we have these vulnerabilities and insecurities that are part of this environment that just allows people to take advantage of that. Yeah, very good point.
And the historical privilege.
Mm-hmm.
Who has been those that are privileged and can get by and get away with it? As opposed to those who
Yeah.
are in that privileged status for whatever reason. I mean, it can just be, we always talk about how, we're at Tech, the history and the historical nature of how we are where we're at right now based on history, and I think that happens everywhere, but
Mm-hmm.
who historically has had the privilege to be able to bully and get by with it. And it's like, okay.
Yeah. And how has that been addressed in the past?
So we're
By the
the
structure
to
to,
then have consequences, yeah.
Yeah, so it just feels like, well, it's,
so policies and procedures are intentionally not there that lend itself to allowing the bullying to happen, and in what ways can we now say, oh, we can shove this policy or this procedure that intentionally disrupts that to ensure that there is some consequence, some education. Maybe people, not in all cases, some folks may not realize that what they're doing is not. And we've guided them to a policy or procedure or appropriate way in which.
yeah. And that's my hope, is that a lot of times people might be more open to it if they knew, like, well, this is what is expected of me as a individual in this environment or this community.
Well, I think it goes back to the consequence. I mean, if your performance evaluation had an aspect of this in it, or whether or not you qualified for your merit raise or whatever,
Yeah.
I mean, where are we as an institution to put those touch points intentionally in place to say yes or no? And
Yeah, and that's why we want to have this conversation with those of you that are leaders in programs and departments, to talk about how can we do this, not only on the wider graduate school level, but more specifically in your own communities and environments. How can we disrupt bullying as a target? So this, can be helpful if you feel like you are subjected to these types of behaviors. Procedurally, of course, what you want to do is seek allies. So talk to people about what's going on. Try to understand that if you're feeling like this is a hostile or offensive environment, that assessment alone is worth reaching out and talking to somebody about. Try to talk to people, seek allies, maybe approach someone of a higher level of authority. There is a reporting form on the Disrupting Academic Bullying website that you can anonymously put a report in. Also, the graduate school has an ombudsperson, and I'm very happy to talk to people about the situations that they're experiencing, which is confidential, it's impartial, it's informal, so nothing has to happen. It could just be a way to talk about what's going on. So those are some procedural aspects. There's also a self-care aspect to it. So bullying can be very psychologically damaging. So make sure that you can find outlets to reduce stress, build your professional network. This is something that I see a lot of time with students, especially international students. As they come here, they're connected to their advisor, and they feel like that is Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is essentially their advisor, and that's the small circle that they're part of. So what I often encourage in those situations is for them to reach out and try to expand their professional network so that they can have more than just the behaviors and input of their single advisors. But that goes for people beyond that relationship as well. So also, beyond building a professional network, try to strengthen identity outside of work or school. Look for ways that you can, try to build up your identity in other ways, because, you don't want to be have all that psychological pressure on this one relational dynamic. And then consider support from mental health professionals, and that is key as well. A lot of times people feel like, well, I don't, I'm not the type of person that sees a mental health professional, but they are here for a reason. They're in our communities for a reason. They can be very helpful to help people through difficult times. Disrupting bullying as a bystander, so in the moment. And this goes with the caveat that it takes in the situational assessment to determine, what is going to be appropriate in the moment. But number one, at least acknowledge to yourself that you are witnessing behavior that might qualify as bullying. That awareness that doesn't dismiss the behavior is key. Ask the target if they would like assistance, or if you feel comfortable, like you have the ability to do so, try to shut down bullying behaviors in group situations in a non-defensive way. So like I said, you don't have to be aggressive in a confronting style that puts down the bully, but you can at least try to raise it, divert or redirect the conversation, any of the ways that we've already talked about. Follow-up action, this right here is key. At the very least, I would hope that in our community we can start doing this more often when we observe bullying behavior, but reach out to the target of bullying behavior. If appropriate, speak to the aggressor in private. So if you do have that relationship, say you're a committee member and you feel like maybe that wasn't positive, constructive feedback, I'm going to reach out and just say, what was going on there? What's happening here? Know the resources available for the target and yourself. So there's a bunch of resources here. And then once again, observers or bystanders can submit a report via the academic bullying referral form. What can we do to disrupt bullying as a leader? And there's a whole page on the Disrupting Academic Bullying site to take a look at that goes into these actions a little bit deeper. I'm also available to kind of, be a sounding board, talk about ways that things can be done. But directly, one, you can listen and observe what's going on. So if somebody comes to you and says that they're experiencing this, listen to them. After you listen to them, try to pay attention, be more aware to see if, is this something that is prevalent in my environment? Is this something that maybe there's just a one-time situation or something that can be addressed in a different mode? But do listen and observe. And then after you've observed, make sure that you have consistent responses to complaints. Because that's another thing that I hear a lot in my role is, well, I can't say anything because, people at a higher level of authority won't do anything anyways because, one, they're friends with these people, or, that's often a way that, we dismiss ourselves when we're feeling in conflict or feel like we need to have a difficult conversation, is that other people will dismiss what we have to say. But if you can at least listen and observe and then give a consistent response that you're at least hearing and that you're going to look into it, you're going to have a conversation with somebody, that can be a way to try to kind of change that dynamic in the environment. Annual review processes. So, if you're a leader, supervisor, and you can make this part of what people are expected annually, I think that would also have a direct change in the way that people treat each other. Indirect ways that you can disrupt bullying as a leader: set expectations for conduct. So we have the principles of community here at Virginia Tech, but reiterate them and what they mean in your department, in your program, to ensure that people are not treating people in a hostile or offensive manner. Have awareness when recruiting. So, Janice, you know a lot about the holistic admissions process. Same thing when you're recruiting people to be part of your team. Think about more than just the resume that's there, but how are they going to fit into the relational dynamics of our group? And then also train for awareness. So conversations like this, presentation like this that just allows people to start to have a operational definition of some of these behaviors and some of these concepts might allow people to feel more comfortable disrupting bullying in your group environment. So we have resources that are available. We have a website that I've talked about. We have the Academic Bullying Referral Form, Cook Counseling for Students, Equity and Access out of Human Resources, the Dean of Students Office, and then the Ombudsperson, of course. If you go to our website, and Ann just got these up on our website yesterday, or very recently, we have a variety of cases that can be used for reflection. There's nice multiple perspective situations that are provided there. So I don't know, but you can go there and you can find the information, the cases there. But let's talk about next steps right now. So one of the next steps that I'm hoping can happen is to have presentations across departments. I've already gone to a couple departments and talked about this type of issue. I'm going to be in Fish and Wildlife next week. I'm going to have a good conversation there. But really what we want to do is roll this out so that, you know, not only students, but also faculty members and staff understand that what we're working on here in terms of this effort. And there is a presentation that is on that website, so you can click that presentation. So if you want to feel comfortable, you know, leading the conversation, there's a lot of inquiry that's integrated into the slides, so it really is set up to have a conversation through a presentation. Or if you would like assistance, I'm happy to go out and do this type of presentation through education and outreach. It's something that I enjoy doing. We're also working on continued messaging. We want to think about ways that we can make people more aware of this effort through campaigns or, you know, flyers. There's flyers that I have here, and I can send this out to anybody that would like a flyer that we can hang in the hallways or put in offices. We also have, and Dean DePauw has mentioned this in the past, a plan to ask programs or departments to develop a framework for an action plan, or develop an action plan that looks at how can you disrupt academic bullying in your specific environment. And I put together a little framework here for an action plan, which kind of looks at, you know, how do we strive to be defined as a community? What are proactive measures we will employ to maintain this type of community? What are channels for voicing concerns within our community? Expectations for addressing concerns that are shared? Protocol for ensuring transparency while maintaining proper confidentiality? And then evaluative criteria for measuring the impact of our efforts. And so this would be a very robust action plan. And I've got some ideas for rolling people through conversations, or have some guides that you could bring conversations to develop something like this in your department. But I kind of want to hear in the last 5 or 10 minutes that we have here, what are some initial incremental steps that you feel could bring forward this effort in your specific departments or programs?
This looks a lot like the steps that I'm engaging in for a community development plan, just for the grad program in general. Because now we're revising our graduate handbook, and each department meeting, I'm having faculty, or my group, my team, come together and make decisions on departmental policy. And grad students are invited into those conversations.
Great.
So we have a shared conversation around, and work that I'm doing is trying to make sure then that those conversations are transparent, and that there is not bullying that occurs afterward because of voices that are. So I'm kind of navigating that work, but I see the end point being really good. So I think this is excellent, especially if there's a tool to then kind of guide what that plan should be. Good evaluation. Are you being effective? Is it working? Yeah, and so in one measure that I'm going to start using, of course, in our orientation week to have a workshop. We'll see how many faculty attend with the grad students. But the annual review process for our grad students will have the full leadership over it rather than faculty having to submit it. So I'm switching the way that the entire process works. And then I want some just anonymous feedback at the end of each year from those grad students. So it's going to be a Qualtrics survey.
Oh, good.
Where that information will not be shared to the department. It's to guide my work, because there's a lot of work that someone in a leadership position, even if I'm not in a tenure track position, it's still the work that I do then guides how the department functions in our grad program. So there's a lot of things I can do that no one will even know why, right? They don't have to know why, or what was the feedback that then caused me to take on this action item as my goal for like that semester or that year. So it's just a way that grad students can have that voice and know that someone's going to take steps, but then you have to take steps, or like, why am I doing this anyway?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they got to know that there's some follow through there.
Yeah.
So that's great, and that would be a very robust plan. Some of the things that we talked about in terms of, at least initial steps, and this is Dean DePana, and I'd like to kind of get your thoughts about this, but one of at least coming out with maybe a statement or a paragraph that talks about how you will bring this effort of disrupting academic bullying forward in your environment, your program, or your department. So that's something that we see as maybe an initial step. How does that feel for people? Does that feel comfortable? Do you feel with this type of awareness of what you're looking at, that could be something that is developed?
I think it should be embedded in the departmental mission statement, instead of, because we do a lot of piece things, and so if it's supposed to become a culture change, then it should be embedded within the already existing kind of philosophy and mission statement of that department, instead of its own just, well, we're
Statement
because they would like us to have, then here's our statement, right? I would say that piece would be embedded throughout.
Yeah, and that's a good point there. So looking at, does this get integrated in your mission statement? One thing that we looked at in terms of incentivizing departments and programs was creating a place on our website where we could acknowledge these are programs or departments that have committed to disrupting academic bullying, and then we could put the statements there, and then also that could be noted on the program website as well, just so when aspiring students or faculty members, whoever's coming to this environment, would see that's the type of environment that I want to be part of.
Can you hear me? This is Audra Van Wart.
Hi, Audra. Yeah.
Great. Yes, I unmuted myself.
All right.
Yeah, I just had something to add. I think that's great. I think having some kind of statement, saying that we recognize academic bullying happens and we want to do something about it. I think that's all fantastic. I think even before that stage, there's that issue of culture and culture change. Mm-hmm. And I can say, there are things that I can think of that are clear examples of crossing the line in academic bullying that we hear about happening, or that that happens to students or between peers or faculty to faculty. But I think there's a lot that's in the gray area, and I think it would be really helpful, I don't know what format, but to have some kind of discussion or education about what kind of falls in that realm of academic bullying, because I think people just don't know. There's just, between the generations, there are different cultures in terms of what is acceptable. I learned by the Socratic method, and this is not bullying, and you're going to feel a little intimidated when you're up there and don't know the answer. I just feel like faculty have a hard time drawing that line, and students do as well. I see there's a lot of peer-on-peer bullying from some of the same students that are very sensitive to whether they're being academically bullied. So I don't know what's the best solution, but if there was some way to have a broader discussion about how that's defined, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, and Adra, thank you for bringing that up. And I think that is important, because I think that is what causes a lot of what would be bullying behaviors too. take place is because people have a hard time distinguishing, is this the environment how it's supposed to be, or is this something that is hostile or offensive? And that's another reason why I think bringing this conversation to the various programs and departments and groups so that that can be understood, at least discussed at those levels, so that there's a shared understanding there, would be a very important kind of next step in this, so that then any type of statement, as you say, can be created with complete buy-in that this is the environment that we want to affirm. But I think ultimately, I guess my stance, and I like what Brene Brown here provides as civility in this quote, where there are different educational models and ways that we engage in providing feedback, but that does not necessarily make it right. And and in the work that we're doing, I think trying to go to a more generalized positive feedback cycle is something that we can hopefully get to in our environment. But definitely we need to start with the conversations at the local levels to see what is the environment that's experienced out there, what's important about that, how can that be perceived by those that are within that community or subjected to those behaviors. Is that okay? Is that not okay? And what kind of community or group dynamic do we want to affirm?
There's a lot of work to be done. When the program was first put out, it was on the website. Language.
Mm-hmm.
So the words that are used, and I know they were chosen intentionally, but how others might interpret those words, like bullying. I heard so much feedback from colleagues across campus that was, this is bullying, we're in grad school. So before we would even have read into any of the, okay, so what do we actually mean by this? Like harassing type behavior, when they see bullying, it's, oh, well, don't grow up. If you're here, this is academia. So it's that culture that's pervasive also, but then the language trying to soften that blow could have led to some dismissal due to what is already established.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that is a reality too. I mean, as Audra was getting to, you're going to have people that feel like this is, and for right or wrong, I mean, yeah, there is the need to put people on the spot. There is a need to make people feel uncomfortable. But then where does that line stand where the positive, productive learning environment now becomes a hostile, intimidating, threatening environment?
And it's different for each individual that's experiencing it too.
Mm-hmm.
But those lines are different.
Yeah. And so, since that's the case,
Yeah.
and we have the ability to understand that people are going to perceive different things differently, how can we create an environment where people feel comfortable talking about that? And it's not necessarily going to be where, well, okay, so because you raise this, we're going to have punitive actions against somebody,
Yeah.
but we're going to at least see what can we do to help you feel heard, help you feel comfortable that this environment is meant for this purpose, to increase your learning through this method. It's not meant to be hostile, offensive, intimidating. And at least having that conversation, I think, is a step towards helping people feel better about the community that they're part of. if people want to continue this conversation, please do reach out to me. You can find my contact information on the Ombudsperson website. You can find it on the Academic Bullying website. But ultimately, we want to keep this conversation going. We would like to see if you have or would like to take one of those steps of creating an action plan by at least creating a statement or paragraph about what efforts that your program or environment your program is trying to create in terms of disrupting academic bullying. You can send those to me, and then I'll work with Kathy and the dean to look at those incentivizing type ways that we can put them on the web, create a awareness that here are communities, programs, departments that are really investing in this initiative. But if you have other ideas, definitely reach out to me as well. We'll keep this conversation going. So thank you.